I remember the
Are
exact
you
night
even
everything finally
listening
broke
to
inside me.
us?
It was quiet.
Yeah, I
Too quiet.
heard you.
The house
Just
felt
a
empty,
second.
even
Put
though
the
people were
phone
sleeping in
down.
every room. I
Now.
was sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee I had poured hours earlier. My phone was face down beside me. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. And that silence told me more than words ever could. That was the night I realized something painful. They didn't see me as someone who sacrificed. They saw me as someone who owed them. They called me ungrateful. After I gave up my future for them, I didn't always feel afraid like this. There was a time when fear didn't live in my chest. When I believed family meant safety. When I believed love was something you could earn just by showing up and doing the right thing. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. I want to tell you how it really started. Not the fight. Not the betrayal. But the fear that shaped every choice I made long before anyone ever raised their voice at me. I grew up believing that being needed was the same thing as being loved. Nobody ever said it out loud, but I felt it in the air of our house. If you were useful, you mattered. If you carried weight, you belonged. My father was a quiet man. Not cruel. Not warm either. He worked long hours and came home tired. He didn't talk much about feelings. He talked about responsibility, bills, sacrifice, doing what had to be done. My mother was the emotional center of the house. She worried about everything. Money, reputation, what people would say, what family would think. Her fear leaked into me slowly, like water through a cracked wall. I didn't notice it at first. I just learned to be careful, to be good, to not cause problems. I was the oldest son. That meant something in our house. It meant expectations came early. It meant pressure without explanation. It meant I learned how to swallow my feelings before I learned how to name them. When I was a kid, I was praised for being mature. Adults said it like it was a gift. You're so responsible for your age. What they didn't see was how heavy that praise felt. Responsibility became my identity before I ever got to be just a kid. I learned fast that my value came from how much I could handle. And deep down, I was scared of what would happen if I ever stopped. The fear wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It whispered. It told me that if I failed, everything would fall apart. It told me that if I chose myself, I would hurt everyone else. It told me that love could be taken away. That fear followed me into my teenage years. While other kids were dreaming out loud, I was doing math in my head, calculating costs, thinking about backup plans, thinking about how to be useful. I had dreams, real ones. I wanted to leave town. I wanted to study something creative. I wanted a life that felt like mine. But every dream came with guilt attached to it. Like I was stealing something that didn't belong to me. Whenever I talked about leaving, my mother's face would tighten. She wouldn't stop me. She wouldn't argue. She would just sigh and say things like, "We'll figure it out somehow." Those words did damage. Because I heard the unspoken part. Without you, we struggle. So I stayed quiet. I stayed close. I stayed useful. The first real sacrifice didn't feel dramatic at the time. It never does. It felt reasonable, sensible, adult. I turned down a chance to move away for school. Told myself I could do it later. Told myself family came first. Everyone nodded. Everyone agreed. Everyone thanked me. That felt good. For a while. Then there was another sacrifice. And another. Each one smaller than the last, but heavier somehow. Like stacking stones on my chest one by one. I told myself this was just how life worked. You give. You wait. You earn your turn. Only my turn never came. By my early 20s, I was working full-time. Helping with bills. Fixing things around the house. Being the dependable one. The one who didn't complain. The one who could be counted on. People praised me for it. That praise became another trap. Because once people see you as strong, they stop checking if you're okay. Fear changes shape as you grow older. It stopped being about survival and started being about identity. Who would I be if I stopped carrying everyone else? I didn't know how to answer that. My siblings grew up differently. They had space to make mistakes. Space to explore. Space to be selfish sometimes. Nobody asked them to carry the house on their back. Nobody expected them to give things up quietly. I didn't resent them. Not then. I told myself this was just my role. That every family needed someone like me. The one who stayed steady. The one who absorbed pressure so others didn't have to. But something inside me was shrinking. I started to feel tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. A deep tired. A tired that comes from living a life that doesn't fully belong to you. The fear really took hold when my father got sick. Everything changed overnight. Medical bills. Stress. Uncertainty. I didn't hesitate. I stepped in. Took on more work. Put my own plans on hold again. Nobody asked me to. They didn't have to. Fear made the decision for me. I told myself this was temporary. Just until things stabilized. Just until everyone was okay again. But temporary became permanent fast. Months turned into years. I watched opportunities pass by like cars on a highway I wasn't allowed to drive on. Friends moved away. Built lives. Took risks. I stayed where I was, telling myself I was doing the right thing. And the worst part? The more I gave, the more it was expected. At some point, gratitude turned into assumption. People stopped saying thank you. They started saying things like, "You'll handle it," or "You're good at this," or "We need you." Need became a leash, and fear tightened it. I was afraid that if I ever said no, I would be seen as selfish, ungrateful, disloyal, afraid that love would turn cold, afraid that all the years of giving would be erased by one moment of choosing myself. So I kept going. I kept shrinking. I kept telling myself this was what being a good son meant. The night everything finally broke didn't start with shouting. It started with an accusation so casual it almost slipped past me. Someone said, "You've changed. You're not grateful like you used to be." That word hit me harder than any insult. Ungrateful. I sat there smiling, nodding, acting calm. But inside, something cracked. Because for the first time, I saw it clearly. All my sacrifices had been rewritten. Not as gifts, but as obligations. And obligations don't earn love. They just delay resentment. That night, sitting alone at that kitchen table, I felt the full weight of the fear that had guided my life. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of becoming invisible if I stopped being useful. I realized I had built my entire identity around not being a burden. And somehow, that turned me into one anyway. I wish I could say that realization freed me immediately. It didn't. It hurt. It confused me. It scared me even more. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And the truth was this. I had given up my future for people who never planned to give me mine back. And that was only the beginning of the fall. I didn't learn how to dream in that house. I learned how to stay. Our house was never loud, never chaotic. But it was heavy. Heavy with unsaid rules. Heavy with expectations that nobody wrote down, but everybody followed. It was the kind of house where silence meant agreement and questions felt like disrespect. I learned early that love came with conditions. Not spoken ones. Quiet ones. You felt them in the way people looked at you when you said something unexpected. You felt them in the way the room went still if you pushed back even a little. My father believed in endurance. He believed a man proved himself by how much he could carry without complaining. He never said it directly, but he lived it every day. Long hours. Bent shoulders. No excuses. When he talked about life, it was always about duty. Never about joy. My mother believed in sacrifice. She wore it like a badge of honor. She would tell stories about all the things she gave up for us. Usually when she was tired or stressed. She didn't mean to hurt anyone. But those stories planted seeds. They taught me that love was measured in loss. And I was listening. My siblings were younger. They were protected from that weight. When they made mistakes, it was forgiven. When they struggled, it was understood. When they wanted something, people tried to help. When I struggled, it was expected. When I hesitated, it was questioned. When I wanted something, it was postponed. Not denied, just delayed. That was the trick. I became the emotional buffer without realizing it. When my parents were stressed, I stayed calm. When money was tight, I stayed quiet. When tension filled the room, I learned how to disappear just enough to not make it worse. People think strength is loud. Mine was invisible. I didn't slam doors. I didn't rebel. I didn't run away. I absorbed. I adjusted. I adapted. And every time I did, it reinforced the role they had already given me. The reliable one. The stable one. The one who would always be there. It sounds noble when you say it like that. But living it feels different. Living it feels like slowly forgetting who you are outside of what you provide. As I got older, the expectations became more practical. Money. Time. Decisions. I was included in conversations I didn't ask to be part of. I was consulted. Relied on. Leaned on. At first, that felt good. It made me feel important. Needed. Like I mattered. But being needed is not the same as being loved. I didn't understand that yet. Every time a problem came up, eyes turned to me. Not because I had the best answer, but because I would take responsibility. I would step in. I would figure it out. And I never asked myself the question that mattered most. What does this cost me? I remember one night clearly. We were sitting around the dinner table. My father looked exhausted. My mother looked worried. There was talk about bills, about uncertainty, about how things were going to be hard for a while. Nobody asked me to say anything, but I spoke anyway. I can work more hours, I said. I'll help cover it. The relief in the room was instant. Shoulders relaxed. Voices softened. Someone smiled. That moment locked something into place. From then on, helping wasn't something I did. It was something I was expected to do. I started making choices based on what would cause the least stress for everyone else. Not what would bring me joy. Not what would grow me. Just what would keep the peace. Peace became my addiction. I avoided conflict like it was danger. I avoided disappointment like it was failure. I avoided saying no like it was betrayal. Every yes I gave felt small at the time. But together, they built a life that didn't feel like mine. I told myself this was just a phase. That once things settled, I'd take my turn. That someday, it would be okay to want more. But someday kept moving. My siblings grew into their own lives. They talked about plans, about moving, about relationships, about risks. People listened to them differently, encouraged them, warned them gently, but never stopped them. When I talked about leaving, the room changed. My mother would worry. My father would go quiet. Someone would mention how hard things already were, how much I helped, how important it was that I was there. Nobody said, "Don't go." They didn't have to. Fear did the job for them. I didn't feel trapped. I felt responsible. That's the dangerous part. Responsibility sounds honorable. It sounds adult. It sounds like strength. But when responsibility is one-sided, it becomes a cage you build yourself. I was praised for being dependable, trusted, mature. Those words kept me in place. They made leaving feel selfish, like I would be breaking some unspoken contract. And the thing is, I signed that contract without reading it. The house taught me how to stay, but it never taught me how to leave. Every time I chose my family over myself, it felt like the right thing, like the moral thing, like the loving thing. But slowly, quietly, resentment started to grow. Not loud resentment, soft resentment, the kind that shows up as exhaustion, as numbness, as feeling older than you are. I didn't hate anyone. I didn't blame anyone. I blamed myself for wanting more, for feeling tired, for imagining a different life. I thought something was wrong with me. The roles in our family were clear by then. My father was the provider who was worn down. My mother was the caretaker who sacrificed. My siblings were the future. And me? I was the bridge. The one holding everything together while standing nowhere myself. Nobody asked if I was okay standing there. There were moments I almost broke out. Job offers. Chances to move. People who believed in me. Each time, I hesitated. Each time, I thought about the house. About the silence. About the looks I would get if I left. Not angry looks. Disappointed ones. Those were worse. Disappointment felt like withdrawal of love. So I stayed. And every time I stayed, it became harder to imagine leaving. The scariest part wasn't that I gave things up. It was that people started to believe I had nothing to give up. They talked about my life like it was flexible, adjustable, always available. Like my time and dreams were extra pieces that could be moved around as needed. Nobody said it out loud, but I felt it. By the time my father's health got worse, my role was permanent. There was no discussion, no question. I stepped in fully. Financially, emotionally, practically. I didn't resent it then. I thought this was what love looked like. Showing up when it mattered. Being there when it was hard. But love that only flows one way changes you. It hardens parts of you. It silences parts of you. It teaches you that your needs come last. I became careful with my feelings. I stopped sharing doubts. Stopped talking about dreams. Stopped expecting understanding. I learned how to nod. How to smile. How to say it's fine and mean I'm tired. I didn't realize how much I was losing until one day I looked at myself and didn't recognize who I was outside of my role. I wasn't living. I was maintaining. That house shaped me. It made me strong in ways that don't show. It also taught me to disappear quietly. And the worst part? Everyone thought I was happy. Because I never complained. Because I never left. Because I never asked for more. But inside, something was already breaking. I just didn't know it yet. I didn't notice the change at first. It didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in quietly, like dust settling on furniture you stop seeing because it's always there. Giving became my default language. If someone needed help, I stepped in. If there was tension, I softened it. If a problem showed up, I carried it. I stopped asking what I wanted because the answer never seemed useful. At some point, People stopped asking me what I wanted to. I remember the first time I felt invisible in my own life. It was small, almost nothing. A family conversation about plans for the future. Everyone was talking about where they might go, what they might try. Jobs, cities, possibilities. I sat there listening. No one turned to me. Not because they didn't care, but because they already knew my answer. I would stay, and that realization hit harder than any argument ever could. My days followed a rhythm that wasn't mine. Work, home, responsibility, repeat. I was reliable down to the minute. People depended on that. They planned around it. I became part of the structure. Like a wall. Useful. Necessary. Not asked how it feels to stand there. I told myself this was adulthood. That this was what growing up looked like. That dreams were a luxury for people who had room to fall. I didn't have room. I was holding too much. The more I gave, the quieter my inner voice became. It didn't disappear all at once. It faded, like a radio losing signal. I could still hear it sometimes, late at night, when the house was asleep. It would ask questions I didn't want to answer. Is this really your life? How long are you going to wait? What happens if you stop? Those questions scared me, so I drowned them out with responsibility. People started to come to me first. Not just family, friends too. I became the guy who listened, who helped, who fixed things, who stayed calm when everything else felt shaky. That role came with praise. You're so strong. I don't know how you do it. We'd be lost without you. Those words felt good for a moment. Then they felt like chains. Because once people see you as strong, they don't protect you. They lean harder. I learned how to hide exhaustion. I learned how to smile through it. I learned how to say it's fine in a way that stopped further questions. Nobody noticed the nights I sat alone, feeling like my life was passing by through a window I couldn't open. Nobody noticed the way my chest felt tight when I thought about the future. Not fear exactly. More like grief. Like I was mourning something I never got to have. Money became another silent pressure. I didn't make a lot, but I made enough. Enough to help. Enough to contribute. Enough to be depended on. Every dollar I earned felt like it already belonged somewhere else. I stopped buying things for myself. It didn't feel right. I didn't need much anyway. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But wanting less wasn't peace. It was resignation. I noticed a change in how people talked to me. Requests started to sound like statements. You can handle this. You don't mind, right? We'll figure it out. You're here. I didn't argue. I nodded. I adjusted. Each time I did, it reinforced the version of me they believed in. The version who didn't need anything back. There were moments when frustration bubbled up. Small moments. A careless comment. An assumption. Someone forgetting I had plans. Someone changing things last minute because they knew I'd adapt. I swallowed that frustration every time. I told myself they didn't mean it. That I was overreacting. That family doesn't keep score. But something inside me was keeping score anyway. I started to feel distant from myself. Like I was playing a role I had been cast in years ago and never stopped performing. I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision just because I wanted to, without thinking about how it would affect everyone else. Even simple choices felt heavy. The fear that once pushed me to help now trapped me there. Fear of conflict. Fear of disappointment. Fear of being seen as selfish. But deeper than that was another fear. Fear that if I stopped giving, there would be nothing left of me that mattered. That fear kept me silent. My siblings didn't see it. How could they? They were living their lives, building their own paths, making mistakes and learning from them. I was proud of them, truly, but there was a quiet jealousy I didn't want to admit. Not of what they had, but of the permission they were given to have it. No one questioned their choices the way mine were questioned. No one measured their value by what they provided to the family. They were allowed to grow. I was expected to stay the same. The hardest part was how normal it all felt. There was no villain, no dramatic moment, no clear injustice you could point to and say, that's where it went wrong. It just happened. Slowly, politely, lovingly. And that made it harder to resist. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, getting ready for work, and feeling this strange sense of distance. Like I was watching someone else's life. I looked tired, older than I should have. Not physically, emotionally. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If nothing changes, is this enough? The answer came quickly. No. That scared me more than anything else. I tried to imagine leaving, starting over, choosing myself. The image felt unreal, like a story that belonged to someone else. I couldn't picture the aftermath, the conversations, the disappointment, the quiet tension that would follow. I imagined the house without me. The gaps I filled suddenly visible. That guilt pulled me back every time. I began to realize something painful. My value in the family had become tied to my sacrifice. Not my presence. Not my happiness. My sacrifice. And sacrifices are only appreciated as long as they continue. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad. Sad for the version of myself who believed this was the only way to be loved. Sad for the years I spent waiting for permission that was never coming. I wasn't trapped by chains. I was trapped by expectations. And expectations are harder to break because they live inside you. I didn't know it yet, but I was approaching the point where something had to give. You can only bend so far before you either break or change shape. And I had been bending for a very long time. There is a moment in every long sacrifice where you stop feeling heroic and start feeling hollow. For me, that moment didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with silence. I was sitting in my car one evening, parked outside the house, engine off, lights dark. I wasn't avoiding anyone. I just couldn't bring myself to go inside yet. The thought of stepping back into my role felt heavy, like putting on a coat soaked in rain. That scared me, because that house was supposed to feel like home. I started noticing how often I needed to be alone just to breathe. How conversations drained me instead of filling me. How even small requests felt heavy, not because they were hard, but because they were expected. Expectation is a quiet killer. It doesn't attack you. It leans on you. Day after day, I became careful with my words. I stopped expressing opinions that might cause tension. I stopped correcting misunderstandings. I let people assume things about me because correcting them felt exhausting. When you live like that long enough, you start to fade. Not in other people's eyes, in your own. I remember a family gathering where everyone was laughing, talking over each other, sharing stories. I was there, smiling, nodding, playing my part. But inside, I felt distant, like I was watching from the outside. At one point, someone joked about how I never went anywhere, how I was always around. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but something inside me tightened, because they didn't hear what I heard. You're predictable. You're stationary. You're not going anywhere. That was the first time I wondered if staying had cost me more than leaving ever would have. I began to feel resentment toward moments that interrupted my routine, not because they were bad, but because they reminded me I had no space of my own, no time that was truly mine. Even rest felt borrowed. I would sit in my room late at night, scrolling through my phone, watching other people's lives move forward. Jobs, moves, relationships, new beginnings. I told myself comparison was pointless, but I couldn't stop thinking about the life I never let myself try. There were times I wanted to scream, not out of anger, out of grief. Grief for the man I might have been if fear hadn't guided so many of my choices. Instead, I stayed quiet. Silence had become my survival skill. My father's condition stabilized for a while, but the stress didn't leave. It just shifted. New worries replaced old ones. New problems showed up, and I was still there, filling gaps, smoothing edges, making sure everything held together. Nobody asked if I wanted to keep doing it. They didn't need to. I always had. I noticed something uncomfortable about myself. I had started measuring my worth by how much I was needed. On days when nobody asked me for help, I felt strangely empty. Useless. That realization shook me, because it meant I didn't know who I was without responsibility. I tried small acts of rebellion. Tiny ones. Saying no to little things. Taking time for myself. Setting soft boundaries. Each time, I felt guilt rush in. Thick and immediate. Someone would sigh. Someone would look disappointed. Someone would say, "It's fine," in a way that meant it wasn't. Those reactions pulled me right back. Fear won again. I began to feel like I was disappearing in slow motion. Like parts of me were being erased quietly, politely, without anyone noticing. My opinions softened. My desires blurred. My voice lowered. I became easy. And being easy made me invisible. There was a night when my mother said something without thinking. She was stressed, tired, overwhelmed. She said, "I don't know what we'd do without you. You're all we have." She meant it as love, but it landed like a weight. Because love shouldn't feel like a trap. That sentence replayed in my head for weeks. You're all we have. It didn't sound like appreciation anymore. It sounded like a sentence. I started having trouble sleeping. Not because of noise or stress, but because my mind wouldn't stop asking questions I had avoided for years. What happens if you leave? What happens if you stay? Who are you doing this for now? Those questions didn't have easy answers. I felt anger sometimes, then shame for feeling it. How could I be angry when everyone depended on me? When people had it worse? When I had chosen this? I reminded myself that I wasn't forced. But choice under pressure doesn't feel like freedom. I noticed how differently people reacted when I showed even a hint of frustration, confusion, surprise, discomfort. It was like seeing a wall speak. They weren't used to me having limits. That hurt more than I expected. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in a window. I looked tired, not broken, just worn thin, like fabric stretched too many times. I realized something important then. I wasn't living a life. I was maintaining a system. And systems don't care about how you feel. They just keep running until something breaks. I tried to talk about it once. Just once. I hinted at feeling tired, at wanting something different. The response was gentle, but dismissive. You're just stressed. It'll pass. Things will get better. Nobody asked what I wanted to be better. That's when I understood the truth I had been avoiding. My pain didn't fit into the story people had written for me, so it was ignored. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't ready to fight, but I was no longer okay. And when you reach that point, something always changes. Because you can't disappear forever without eventually being lost. I didn't wake up one morning and decide I was done. That's not how it happened. It happened slowly, through moments that felt small but cut deep. Moments that made me realize something had shifted in the way my family saw me, and in the way I saw myself. Love, at some point, started to feel like a debt I could never fully repay. The first clear crack showed up during a conversation about money. Nothing dramatic. Just numbers, bills, future plans. I had already been helping for years, contributing more than I ever talked about, quietly adjusting my own life around everyone else's needs. That night, someone said, "You can probably help more, right? I mean, you don't really have big expenses." They said it casually, like a fact, like my life was empty space. I nodded, but inside, something went cold. Because that sentence erased everything I had already given. All the years, all the compromises, all the dreams I postponed. It reduced my life to availability. I started noticing how often my sacrifices were treated as normal, expected, like they were part of the background, like electricity in a house. Nobody thanks it. They just get annoyed when it goes out. When I did something extra, there was no appreciation, just relief. And relief doesn't feel like gratitude. It feels like entitlement. There was a time when my family would check in with me, ask how I was holding up, ask if I was okay. Those questions slowly disappeared. People assumed I was fine because I always handled things, because I never complained, because I didn't look like I was struggling. Strength, once proven, becomes a prison. I remember missing an opportunity that still hurts when I think about it. A job that would have taken me out of town. Not even far, just far enough to breathe differently. To start building something that felt like mine. I brought it up carefully, softly, like you offer something fragile. The response wasn't angry. It was disappointed. My mother worried. My father went quiet. Someone mentioned timing. Someone mentioned responsibilities. Someone mentioned how much I was needed right now. No one said no, but everyone said stay without using the word. And I did. Again, that was the moment I realized something important. My dreams were optional. My role was not. I began to feel bitterness toward the very people I loved. And that scared me. I didn't want to be that person. The resentful one. The one who keeps score. But resentment doesn't come from nowhere. It grows where needs are ignored. I started noticing how differently my siblings were treated. They were encouraged to chase opportunities. Supported when they needed help. Excused when they couldn't show up. When I hesitated, it was questioned. When I was tired, it was overlooked. When I asked for understanding, it was minimized. I told myself not to compare, that every role was different, that this was just how things were. But fairness isn't about being equal. It's about being seen. And I wasn't. There were moments when I tried to pull back, just a little, reduce how much I gave, protect some energy for myself. The reaction was immediate. Confusion, tension, quiet comments, subtle guilt. You're acting different. You used to be more helpful. Is everything okay with you? Those words weren't concern. They were warnings. I realized then that my value had become transactional. I was loved, but conditionally. As long as I continued to give. As long as I stayed useful. As long as I didn't disrupt the balance. That hurt more than any argument could have. I started asking myself a hard question. If I stopped giving, would they still want me around? That question sat heavy in my chest. One night, I overheard a conversation that changed how I saw everything. I wasn't supposed to hear it. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was practical. Matter of fact. Someone said, "We're lucky he's here. Otherwise, we'd be in real trouble." They weren't talking about love. They were talking about logistics. And that broke something in me. I realized I wasn't seen as a son anymore, or a brother, or a person with needs. I was a solution, and solutions aren't asked how they feel. I became quieter after that, more withdrawn, not because I was angry, because I was tired of pretending everything was fine. People noticed the change, but not the cause. They saw distance, not pain. I started to feel like a guest in my own life, like I was living on hold, waiting for permission to begin. Every year that passed felt heavier, like time itself was pressing down on me, asking what I was doing with it. And I didn't have a good answer. The pressure built slowly. Expectations stacked on top of each other. Responsibilities multiplied. And I kept saying yes, because saying no still felt more dangerous than losing myself. I remember a moment when someone accused me of being selfish for wanting time to myself. Just a comment, said in frustration, quickly brushed off, but it cut deep. Selfish. After everything. That word stayed with me. I started to see the pattern clearly then. The more you give without boundaries, the more people believe you exist to give. And when you finally hesitate, they don't see exhaustion. They see betrayal. I felt trapped between two impossible choices. Keep giving and disappear completely. Or stop giving and become the villain. Neither felt fair. That's when I realized something painful but true. Love without respect turns into control. And respect can't exist where sacrifice is expected but never acknowledged. I wasn't ready to confront anyone yet. I didn't know how. I didn't even know what I wanted. All I knew was that something had shifted inside me. I was no longer willing to erase myself quietly. And that meant a storm was coming, even if I didn't know it yet. I didn't plan the moment it happened. I didn't rehearse it in my head. It came out of exhaustion, not courage. There's a big difference between the two. I had reached a point where my body was tired, my mind was numb, and my heart felt like it had been running a marathon with no finish line. I woke up every day already drained. Not because the work was hard, because it never ended. That's when I realized something simple but terrifying. I couldn't keep living like this. The pressure had been building for years, but now it felt constant. Every call, every conversation, every request carried the same silent message. You'll handle it. And I always had. Until one day, I didn't. It started with something small. A favor. A last-minute request that assumed my time was available. It wasn't even important. Just inconvenient. Normally, I would have said yes without thinking. Rearranged my plans. Adjusted my schedule. Made it work. This time, my mouth moved before fear could stop it. I can't do that today. The room went quiet. Not angry quiet. Surprised quiet. Like I had spoken a language no one expected me to know. Someone laughed, thinking I was joking. Someone else said, "Come on, it's just this once." I shook my head. I really can't. That was it. No explanation. No apology. And that's when I felt it. The shift. The air changed. The warmth faded. People exchanged looks. Not hostile. Confused. As if a rule had been broken and no one knew what to do next. I felt my heart racing. My palms were sweaty. Guilt hit me hard and fast. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to take it back. To say, never mind. To smile. To fix it. But something inside me refused. I stayed silent. That moment didn't feel powerful. It felt terrifying. Because for the first time, I saw how fragile my place really was. After that, things were different. Not openly. Not immediately. But subtly. Requests were phrased differently. Less polite. More direct. Conversations felt strained. Jokes carried an edge. People didn't say anything directly, but I felt it. I was no longer predictable. And that made people uncomfortable. I started saying no more often. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Just honestly. Sometimes I couldn't help. Sometimes I needed rest. Sometimes I wanted time to myself. Each no felt like a small rebellion. Each one came with guilt. But I also felt something new. Relief. The guilt didn't disappear. It argued with me every night. You're being selfish. They need you. You're letting everyone down. But another voice had joined the conversation. What about you? That voice was quiet. But it was persistent. Not everyone reacted badly. Some adjusted. Some understood. Others didn't. And that's when the real conflict began. I started hearing comments that felt like knives wrapped in politeness. You've changed. You're not as dependable as you used to be. We don't know what's going on with you. No one asked how I was. They asked why I wasn't the same. One night, my mother confronted me. Not angrily, tearfully. She said she felt abandoned, that she didn't recognize me anymore, that things felt uncertain without me stepping in like before. Her pain was real, and that's what made this so hard, because choosing myself felt like hurting her. I tried to explain, carefully, gently. I talked about feeling tired, overwhelmed, lost. She listened, but she didn't hear me. She heard threat. She heard instability. She heard fear. She said something that stayed with me. This family has always depended on you. There it was. Not love. Dependence. That conversation left me shaken. I sat alone afterward, questioning everything. Was I wrong? Was I selfish? Was I breaking something that didn't need to be broken? I hated myself for doubting my own needs. But something important had already happened. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had seen the truth. The truth was this. As long as I said yes, I was valued. The moment I said no, I became a problem. And that meant my worth had never been unconditional. I started to see past moments differently. Old conversations replayed in my head with new meaning. The praise, the gratitude, the relief on people's faces when I stepped in. They weren't thanking me for being me. They were thanking me for making their lives easier. That realization hurt deeply, but it also gave me clarity. I noticed how quickly support turned into pressure when I didn't comply. How understanding vanished when I asserted a boundary. That wasn't love. That was convenience. I began to grieve the family I thought I had. Not the people. The idea. The idea that my sacrifices were seen. The idea that my pain mattered. The idea that I was allowed to be human. Letting go of that illusion hurt more than any argument ever could. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. Disappointed that it took so long to see the truth. Disappointed that love had conditions I never agreed to. The house felt colder after that. Not physically. Emotionally. I felt like a guest again. Like I was walking on eggshells, not because I was wrong, but because I wasn't compliant. The silence felt heavy. But despite all that, something inside me felt steadier. For the first time in years, I wasn't disappearing. I was standing still. And that scared everyone else more than it scared me. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how far this would go. I didn't know what it would cost me. All I knew was this. I couldn't go back to being invisible. And once you stop saying yes to everything, people finally show you what your no really means to them. That was only the beginning.